It's Thursday, May 22nd, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, a big, beautiful breakdown. The Republicans get through their one big, beautiful bill, which is actually its name. I didn't make it up. It's through the House of Representatives after a series of long, marathon, overnight arguing sessions, but they've got a budget, and the consequences of this bill are staggering. And if it becomes law, it will make for some of the largest and fastest changes to the lives of tens of millions of Americans. Unfortunately, not all of it for the better. Now, before we get going, please make sure that you're following or subscribed to the show on whatever podcast app you listen to this on, and on YouTube to make sure you don't miss out on any video podcasts there. You can sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article out today all about how Elon Musk saying he's getting out of politics for now and what it means about him, Trump, and the future of the Republican Party. But that article is just for subscribers. It is just $5 a month, and it really helps keep the show going if you sign up. If you don't want to sign up, if that's too much money, no sweat, no worries. But please keep sharing the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod, MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. And with that, let's get on with today's episode. Early this morning, the House of Representatives passed its massive tax and spending budget bill, which was first called the Make America Affordable Again Act. But after President Trump posted on social media about the bill, calling it a big, beautiful bill, the name got changed to the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is dumb even for names of bills, which are usually shoehorned into clunky acronyms or are meant to hide what the bill actually is doing, like this one, but it's a dumb name. Anyway, the bill is what's known as a reconciliation bill, meaning it is literally reconciling both previous agreements in the House and the Senate on taxes and spending, because this is a bill that needed to be worked out after avoiding a government shutdown in the budget earlier this year. But it's also, like I said, reconciling taxes and spending. It's a budget bill. And while there are things that got slipped into this bill that are worth talking about at some point, like a ban on AI regulation, no taxes on tipped wages, and so-called Trump accounts for newborn babies, there are three big things that need to be talked about in this bill. How much more debt it will put the U.S. in, what it'll do to your taxes, and why both of these things mean making cuts to food stamps for kids and healthcare for families and individuals. But first, it's important to know how this got passed, because it tells you something about how members of Congress, even those who support it, feel about it. This bill, when it's printed, will be hundreds, if not more than 1,000 pages long, and it is very unlikely that any member of Congress has actually read this thing all the way through, and maybe even read most of the important parts. On top of that, Republican lawmakers spent the last 2 weeks fighting amongst themselves over this bill. It passed after several overnight marathon sessions, including one just 2 days ago where a vital change to the bill from the Rules Committee wasn't voted on until 1 a.m. And then last night into this morning, this is what the schedule looked like. From 12:45 at night to 1:45 a.m., there was a vote to adopt a new rule. And then between 1:45 and 4:30 in the morning was the debate over the One Big Beautiful Bill. After that, sometime between 4:30 and 5:30, they were expected to vote on passing this bill, and then they were supposed to go home at around 6 a.m. Now, that plan was actually moved up, and things happened faster, and the bill was passed at 3:55 in the morning by a single vote. Now, why was this schedule so crazy? Like, to the point where members of Congress were caught on camera falling asleep during some of these late-night meetings? Well, for starters, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson wanted to get this passed and sent to the Senate in time for Memorial Day weekend because everyone has barbecues to go to and fundraisers. Second, there were a lot of things that were unpopular with a lot of members on both sides of the aisle, and ramming this through while those politicians were tired and cranky and wanted to go home made it more likely it would pass. Third, they knew a lot of the biggest stuff in here, which we'll be talking about today, is unpopular with American voters. It's never a good sign about how you feel about what you're doing if you have to do it while most of the people it will affect are asleep. It's why burglars break into your home at night. So with that in mind, what does this bill do? Let's start with the national deficit, which is how much the U.S. spends versus how much it takes in. To put it very, very simply, right now the national deficit is around $1.8 trillion, and the U.S. has about $3.5 trillion in debt. Now, I've talked about this before. For decades, economists have said neither of those numbers are really that big of a concern because any country that holds U.S. debt isn't really worried that we'll refuse to pay it back or will default on our debt. However, the deficit lately has been a little bit more worrisome for economists because the higher that number is, the harder it will be to convince other countries to continue to lend us money. And on top of it, given the fact that the country is now being run by a man who has never met a company he couldn't bankrupt, those debt worries are even higher. And normally you hear opposition parties, so the parties that are out of the White House or out of power in Congress, talk a lot about the debt and deficit. Democrats did it under Trump, and Republicans did it under Obama and Biden. And usually those criticisms just magically disappear once those parties get back into power because it's expensive to run a country. But Republicans are frequently much more critical of increasing the deficit and the debt, even when they're in power. And it was the same thing this time around. So it was shocking to see that this bill they just passed will increase the deficit by $1.2 trillion and will increase the debt by $4 trillion over the next 10 years, according to the independent group, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And when the White House was pressed on this is what Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said.
Is the president okay with this bill adding to the deficit?
This bill does not add to the deficit. In fact, according to the Council of Economic Advisors, this bill will save $1.6 trillion. And the president absolutely understands and hears the concerns of fiscal conservatives and of Americans who want to get our fiscal house in order. That's what the intention of this bill is.
So that is just a lie. First, the White House Economic Board of Advisors aren't independent. They know that if they give Trump bad news or news he doesn't want to hear, they're likely out of a job. Second, the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan government office that works for members of Congress, found that starting next year, the U.S. will increase its average amount of debt by $352 billion a year. And what Leavitt is talking about with that $1.2 trillion in savings gets us to what this means for your taxes, because those savings come from a combination of tax breaks and cuts to vital programs. So let's talk taxes. The tax bill in this plan would net Americans more money on average, but it's not even across the board. In fact, it harms the poor and the working class the most. The Penn Wharton School of Business, which tracks government spending bills and is also Donald Trump's alma mater, which he talks about very highly, found that if you make under $17,000 a year, your taxes under this plan will go up by $1,000. If you make between $17,000 and $51,000, your taxes will go up by $700. And let's be clear here. The median U.S. salary right now is $48,000, and studies have found that as many as 37% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency charge right now, meaning these tax increases will hit most Americans really hard. Now, beyond that, people making between $52,000 and $388,000, which I know is a huge spread, and we're jumping tax brackets there, but they'll actually be getting money back, somewhere, depending on the bracket, between $845 and $8,800. But the real tax breaks go to the top 20% of Americans, people making between $388,000 and more than $4.3 million a year. Those people will get a tax break between nearly $20,000 on the low end and an absolutely staggering $389,000 in taxes the wealthiest Americans will not have to pay. Meaning, what they aren't paying is equal to more than 8 times the U.S. median salary. Those cuts are the leading cause, according to economists, of the increase in the debt and deficit in this plan. Not waste or fraud in government programs, not crime, not undocumented immigrants in the U.S., but planned tax cuts for the richest people among us. It's just how the math works. And Republicans know that. And they know that they can't just do that without offsetting those costs. So they're making drastic cuts to two of the most popular and crucial government programs for Americans, starting with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, most commonly talked about as food stamps. According to the Republican-controlled Agriculture Committee, since 2019, the number of Americans on food stamps grew 17% from 36 million to 42 million people, largely propelled by the pandemic. The USDA says 60% of people who rely on food stamps are children and the elderly, with 1 in 3 being kids from the ages of 5 to 17, and more than 1 in 10 are children on food stamps who are younger than 5. And according to the Ag Committee, again, the big beautiful bill will cut more than $290 billion from that program, or roughly a third of the entire program, the deepest cut it's ever had. The left-leaning think tank, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, found that those cuts will jeopardize access to food for some 4 million children around the country and 7 million adults, mostly through expanded work requirements and forcing states to pay more of the cost for food stamps. Let's talk about the work requirements. Right now, adults between the ages 18 and 54 have to work at least 20 hours a week to be eligible for food stamps, unless they have some sort of exemption or they're a caregiver like a parent. The bill expands work requirements to adults up to 64 years old and for parents with kids who are 7 years or older. Right now, the majority of households that receive SNAP benefits already work at least part-time, around 60%, and there is no credible belief out there right now that magically increasing the number of work requirements are going to get that number much higher. If anything, experts estimate that it might force people who can't work or can't find work off of food stamps, meaning they'll go hungry. And the same thing goes for Medicaid and Medicare, which is the last big thing in this episode that I'll be talking about, and where the largest cuts are coming from to pay for those tax breaks for the wealthy. I've talked about this before on the show, about how Republicans, at the start of this budget process a few months ago, passed a section in what would become this bill that made it mandatory to cut $880 billion from Medicaid and Medicare funding over the next 10 years. According to the Congressional Budget Office, $700 billion would come from Medicaid, the federal portion of government health care. Right now, about 1 in 5, or more than 71 million Americans, are enrolled in some version of Medicaid, and cuts to it have been a no-go for members of both parties for decades. Medicaid is popular. The people who are on it are mothers, pregnant women, are children, and the elderly, and those folks vote. And Donald Trump has been publicly adamant that Medicaid shouldn't be touched, with an exception. Here he was just a couple days ago.
Here's what I want on Medicaid. We're not touching anything. All I want is one thing. 3 words. We don't want any waste, fraud, or abuse. Very simple. Waste, fraud, abuse. Other than that, we're leaving it. Medicare, we're leaving it. All we're after, and this is for the good of it, is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. That's all we're doing. We're not touching it. The Democrats are going to destroy it. Thank you very much.
So, the myth of fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicaid is rampant. Most health experts agree some element of fraud likely exists in Medicaid, but there aren't any reliable numbers to know how much. On top of that, including things like improper payments, which I have done before on this show, which means like maybe somebody gets paid too much or too little, technically aren't considered waste, fraud, and abuse because they're generally fixed quickly and they don't really fall into one of those categories. But what Trump is talking about, and what the argument from Republicans during this debate has been, is that there are too many people who can work but aren't, who are also on Medicaid. Here's Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise explaining this idea.
but we do put some constraints in place in terms of work requirements and say, if somebody's able-bodied and they can go get a job and they're living in their mom's basement playing video games, I'm sorry, you got to go get a job. This program was designed for the truly needy, the disabled people, pregnant women, seniors. Those are the people we're going to help more by shoring the program up. And so why would you want a runaway program that's going bust right now, which is what we have? Let's get the program back on track. And we do that. But clearly there were a lot of discussions along the way. Some of us that would like to go further. But this is where we are in the bill. But the work requirements are going to be significant reforms to get people back in the workforce. And I think ultimately that's a good thing, to take somebody who's fully able to work to get back to work.
So Scalise there is talking about, just like SNAP, putting in work requirements for people on Medicaid, which this bill does, and is the first time that's been done in Medicaid's 60-year history. And health experts across the board think it is completely unnecessary. By the government's own numbers, just like SNAP benefits, the majority of people on Medicaid work. 44% work full-time. Another 20% work part-time. The other 36% of people include people who go to school full-time, are caregivers, generally for older relatives or relatives with a disability. They have a disability themselves, or they aren't working because they're retired, or they can't find work right now. On top of that, the Kaiser Family Foundation, a highly respected health-focused nonprofit, found that work requirements for Medicaid do lower federal costs for healthcare coverage, but mostly by increasing the number of people who lose health insurance. And it also doesn't increase employment numbers in the states where this kind of thing has been tried. In fact, it's actually the opposite. When people have access to health care, even as basic as Medicaid, studies have shown that those folks tend to have an easier time finding and keeping a job because they can stay healthy, because they can see a doctor. Now, finally, what work requirements will do is force somewhere between 7 million and 10 million people off their health insurance, many who still desperately need it and would otherwise qualify under these new Republican rules. But because filing for Medicaid comes with added bureaucracy of these work requirements, which causes confusion or forces people to miss work, to go fill out paperwork, or many won't even know the changes happened in the first place, their coverage will just simply lapse and they'll be uncovered. And a final thing here is that a lot of these things in this entire bill, a lot like passing this bill in the cover of dark, don't kick in until 2029, 1 year after Trump leaves office and after the midterm elections in 2026, all except the tax cuts. Those happen right away. People got to get paid. But that timeline should give you pause, because if this big, beautiful bill is going to be the largest savings for Americans in history, like the press secretary put it, why not start now? Why not make these changes immediate to get to the saving? The only answer is that members of the Republican Party know that these things will be unpopular and need political cover to hang on to power in the next 2 elections. Now, this bill isn't done yet. It's just passed the House. It has to go to the Senate. There will be some changes made there, likely to some of the stuff that isn't this, because of certain rules that happen between the House and in the Senate. But right now, at least, this bill, the things that are happening to SNAP and Medicaid and to the taxes, are likely going to become law for the next 10 years in America. Okay, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes there. Like I said at the very top, subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month, and you get access to all sorts of great content that's going up there all the time. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.